My daughter's fallen down the stairs. She's not responding to me. She's...
Okay, you with her now?
Yeah.
How old is she?
She's 1. Elsie. I was just changing my daughter for bed, and then she went all floppy and limp, and now she's not doing anything. She's lying on the floor.
Okay, you with her now, sir?
I am.
How old's your daughter?
She's 18 months.
Okay, is she awake?
No.
Is she breathing?
No.
Blow 2 regular breaths into the lungs, about 1 second each, just enough to make the chest rise with each breath. All right, so do those 2 breaths for me now.
Yep.
All right, tell me when you're done.
Done. Oh, my God.
Elsie suffered serious injuries at the hands of her adopted father, and these ultimately caused her death. This was, of course, a tragic case, and our thoughts and sympathies are with Elsie's loved ones. Thank you.
At 6:19 p.m., an emergency call went out from a quiet street in Llandaff, Cardiff. On the line was Matthew Scully Hicks. His words were steady, almost measured, a striking contrast to what he was reporting. His young daughter, he said, was lying unresponsive on the living room floor. Only moments earlier, she had been alert and active. 7 minutes later, at 6:26 p.m., blue lights washed across the neat rows of houses. Neighbors stepped to their windows and doorways, watching as paramedics moved quickly up the path, equipment in hand. From the outside, the scene looked controlled. Inside, however, details weren't aligning. First responders expected the urgency that comes with a life-threatening emergency. Frantic calls for help, immediate attempts to revive her. Instead, they found a calm that raised its own questions. If this was an accident, why did parts of the account already seem inconsistent? This was not the first time concern could have been raised. In just 8 months, the same child had been examined by doctors, visited by health workers, and seen by social services at least 15 times. Each time, an explanation was given. Each time, no further action was taken. That calm-sounding call would mark the beginning of a chain of events revealing missed opportunities, unanswered questions, and a truth far more troubling than anyone had imagined. Before we continue, a quick warning. This case involves the death of a young child. Please brace yourself, because some parts may still be unsettling. And to our loyal subscribers, thank you for always tuning in day after day. Thank you for your shares, likes, and comments that helps keep these stories alive and protect the most vulnerable in our society. Elsie Scully Hicks entered the world on November 17, 2014 in Wales. At birth, she was given the name Shayla O'Brien. Within days, she came to the attention of child protection authorities. 5 days after her birth, she was removed from the care of her biological mother after it was confirmed that the pregnancy had been affected by drug use. Medical checks concluded she was otherwise healthy, and she was placed into foster care under the supervision of the Vale of Glamorgan's social services. In the months that followed, Elsie's biological family remained involved. Her mother and grandparents visited regularly, maintaining a consistent presence in her life. Records from those visits show that the family actively sought to regain custody, challenging the care arrangements through official channels. Their efforts would ultimately be unsuccessful, and a decision was made to seek an adoptive placement. The couple who would later adopt Elsie, Matthew and Craig Scully Hicks, first met in Swindon, Wiltshire, in 2006. At the time, Craig was managing a nightclub and Matthew was working in the fitness industry. Their relationship developed steadily, and in 2012, they traveled to Portugal to marry. Early in their relationship, the pair discussed having children, deciding that adoption was the path they wanted to pursue. They expressed a preference for a young child, hoping to be present for every stage of development, from first steps to first day at school. By September 2015, their home had been approved for adoption. That month, the smiling, 10-month-old Elsie was placed in their care. According to case records, Craig worked full-time as an accounts manager, while Matthew would take on the role of full-time caregiver. This arrangement was supported by their adoption agency and seen by professionals as a stable and positive environment for a child. The Scully Hicks' first home with Elsie was in the Fairwater area of Cardiff. Those who encountered the family during this time, including neighbors, health visitors, and social workers, described the couple as attentive and affectionate toward Elsie. Reports from home visits indicated no cause for concern, and each review reinforced the perception that Elsie was thriving. The family relocated to a larger property in Llandaff, an area known as one of Cardiff's more desirable neighborhoods. Professionals involved in Elsie's care viewed the move as a positive step, interpreting it as further evidence of the couple's commitment to providing for her future. At that time, there were no official records indicating that anyone in a position of authority foresaw the events that lay ahead. To outside observers, it appeared to be the story of a well-matched child and adoptive parents settling into what was expected to be a safe and permanent home. In November 2015, Elsie was taken for medical assessment after sustaining an injury to her lower right leg. X-rays confirmed a fracture to the tibia just above the ankle. At the time, it was recorded as the result of a fall while she was standing at an activity table in the kitchen. Matthew, who was caring for her that day, suggested she may have fallen either while standing or while pushing the table as if it were a walker. The explanation was accepted and Elsie was treated for the single fracture. It would later be revealed that those same X-rays also showed a second break, this one just above her knee, which went unnoticed during the initial review. Dr. Nia John, a consultant community pediatrician, would later testify that had both fractures been identified at the time, established safeguarding procedures required an immediate referral to Child Protection Services. That step was never taken. The following month, in December 2015, another incident occurred. This time, Elsie had a visible bruise to the left side of her forehead. The mark was vertical, yet the explanation provided was that she had fallen forward into the edge of her toy kitchen after the doors swung open, a mechanism that would typically cause a horizontal impact. The injury was noted by a visiting health professional who advised medical follow-up. Records show Matthew stated that she had already been seen by a doctor, which was untrue. No further checks were made. In January 2016, yet another bruise appeared, partially overlapping the one from the month before. Again, the explanation given was accepted without further investigation. The new injury occurred under Matthew's supervision while Craig was at work, as had been the case in the previous incidents. On March 10, 2016, Matthew called for an ambulance, reporting that Elsie had fallen down the stairs. He said the baby gate at the top of the stairs had not been secured, and she had tumbled from the landing to the bottom. At the time, Craig was away in Leicester on business. Responding paramedics noted the absence of obvious external injury, and after a period of observation at hospital, Elsie was discharged home. Between these events, Elsie continued to be seen regularly by social workers and health visitors. Notes from these visits described her as a happy child, in good health, and developing normally, with no records indicating safeguarding concerns. None of the injuries prompted an escalation or referral to Child Protection Services. But when placed together in sequence, these incidents form a pattern, one that would later prove critical to understanding the truth. At the time, however, each event was treated as isolated, unrelated, and explained away. These weren't isolated incidents. They were the opening acts of something far worse. The move to a larger home in Llandaff had been welcomed by those overseeing Elsie's welfare. The new property was in a sought-after neighborhood, and professionals noted it as a sign of stability and commitment. Case files from this period show no indications of concern or pending safeguarding action. In April 2016, a routine check recorded a slight squint in Elsie's left eye. The attending doctor considered it minor and not requiring further investigation. No referral was made, and the matter was left as a non-urgent observation. Over the following weeks, Elsie's days appeared full of normal toddler experiences, attending group play sessions, joining Matthew on errands, and visiting the park. On one of these outings, she went shopping with him to select a dress for her upcoming adoption celebration, an event intended to mark her permanent place in the family. On May 25, 2016, the day began in a way that gave no outward sign of what would come. In the afternoon, the household hosted a family visit. Elsie's young niece spent time with her under Matthew's supervision while Craig was away at work. The two children played together until the visit ended at approximately 5:20 p.m. There was nothing unusual reported during that time. What followed after her niece's departure would form the final hours of Elsie's life, a sequence of events that, once examined in full, would raise questions no one had asked soon enough. After Elsie's niece left the house at around 5:20 p.m., Matthew was alone with her. Craig remained away in Leicester on work commitments. According to Matthew's later account, the evening routine continued as normal. He said that shortly after the visit ended, he served tea and Elsie ate with him at the table. He stated she finished her meal at around 5:45 p.m. Matthew told investigators that once tea was over, he took Elsie into the living room to change her nappy before getting her ready for bed. This was part of a standard evening schedule, and he indicated nothing unusual in her behavior at that moment. He claimed that after completing the change, he briefly stepped into the kitchen to dispose of the nappy. When he returned to the living room moments later, he said Elsie was lying on the floor and unresponsive. There were no reports of a loud fall or any noise that might indicate a sudden accident. At 6:19 p.m., Matthew called emergency services. The operator recorded the details of his report, a young child unresponsive on the floor, and noted his measured, calm tone throughout the conversation. Paramedics arrived within 7 minutes at 6:26 p.m. On arrival, they found Elsie in critical condition and began immediate resuscitation procedures before transporting her to the University Hospital of Wales. Craig was contacted soon after the ambulance arrived. On hearing the news, he left work and began the 4-hour journey back to Cardiff. During the initial response, a paramedic would later recall a private comment from Matthew in which he reportedly said Elsie had screamed in pain and collapsed before becoming unresponsive. This detail was not part of his original explanation to emergency services. At the hospital, Elsie was placed on life support as teams worked urgently to stabilize her. From the moment she arrived, specialists carried out detailed assessments to understand the cause of her sudden collapse. Initial scans revealed injuries that could not be explained by the account Matthew had given. Despite days of intensive treatment, her condition did not improve. On May 29, 2016, life support was withdrawn and she passed away. A post-mortem examination was then authorized and conducted by a team of forensic pathologists. Their findings, presented without unnecessary detail, were significant. They identified bleeding on the brain, known as subdural bleeding, and damage within the eyes, consistent with a traumatic event. There was also a fracture to the skull, described by Professor Fremont, a bone and joint pathology expert, as complex in nature. An injury, he explained, would require a severe force to produce. In addition, fractures were found in several ribs located toward the back of the chest. According to Professor Fremont, these rib injuries were consistent with forceful gripping. The expert consensus concluded that Elsie's injuries were caused by a combination of violent shaking and an impact to the head against a hard surface. These findings did not align with the account provided by Matthew. The defense sought to challenge this medical conclusion. Professor Michael Hollick, appearing for the defense, suggested that Elsie might have been suffering from a vitamin D deficiency or rickets, conditions that can weaken bones and make them more susceptible to injury. However, this theory was strongly rebutted by Dr. Sarah Harrison and other members of the pathology team, who confirmed that Elsie's bones were healthy and showed no signs of metabolic disease. Parallel to the medical work, police began their inquiry. Matthew was first interviewed under caution in June 2016. The investigation continued over several months as evidence was reviewed and expert statements gathered. By December 2016, the case had progressed to the point where detectives arrested Matthew on suspicion of murder. Digital evidence also played a role. Examination of Matthew's phone revealed a series of text messages he had sent to friends and family in the months leading up to Elsie's passing. In these, he expressed growing frustration with her behavior, referring to her in disparaging terms, including calling her a diva and likening her to Satan in a baby grow, comments the prosecution would later highlight as insight into his state of mind. Neighbors also came forward with accounts of hearing Matthew raise his voice towards Elsie on several occasions, telling her sharply to be quiet when she was crying. If you think these cases deserve more attention, take a second to subscribe, because what investigators uncovered next showed how preventable this was.
Scully Hicks had even sent text messages saying, "Honestly, she's Satan dressed up in a baby grow. In bed, half a bottle, just about, and screamed through it all over again." Another read, "Elsie has had 2 nights of being Satan before bedtime, which ain't fun."
The trial of Matthew Scully Hicks began at Cardiff Crown Court in April 2017 and quickly became one of the most closely followed cases in Wales that year. Prosecutors set out their case with a clear and deliberate structure. They alleged that the fatal injuries Elsie suffered on May 25, 2016, were not the result of an accident, but of deliberate actions by Matthew while she was in his sole care. The prosecution drew on months of evidence, including the medical findings and the history of previous unexplained injuries, to present what they described as a consistent and troubling pattern. They argued that each prior incident, the leg fractures, the head bruises, and the alleged fall down the stairs, fit into a timeline that pointed to repeated harm. Medical experts explained to the jury why these injuries were highly unlikely to have occurred in the ways Matthew had described, particularly when viewed together. The defense rejected this interpretation, maintaining that Elsie's injuries were the result of unfortunate accidents. They raised the possibility of underlying bone fragility, suggesting that even minor bumps or falls could have caused significant harm. Craig Scully Hicks was never accused of any wrongdoing, and the defense emphasized that Craig, like the professionals who had interacted with the family, had trusted Matthew's explanations at the time. A central point in the trial was the consensus of the expert witnesses. Specialists from multiple fields agreed that Elsie's injuries were not compatible with accidental causes, nor with any bone disease or deficiency. This conclusion was reached after detailed examination of her medical history, the nature of each injury, and the forensic evidence. After hearing weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than a week. In May 2017, they returned a unanimous verdict, guilty of murder. The sentencing judge described Matthew's actions as a gross breach of trust toward a child he had chosen to adopt and raise as his own. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years before being eligible for parole.
Now, a man has been found guilty of murdering his 18-month-old daughter 2 weeks after formally adopting her. Elsie Scully Hicks died in May last year after suffering bleeding on her brain, a skull fracture and 3 broken ribs. Her paediatrician said it was likely that she had been shaken violently. Matthew Scully Hicks always denies assaulting and abusing the toddler at his home in Cardiff, as our correspondent Rebecca Williams reports.
In her short life, 18-month-old Elsie suffered a torrent of abuse. She ended up with a broken skull and a bleed on the brain after being violently shaken. And that all happened at the hands of this man, Elsie's adopted father, Matthew Scully Hicks, who's today been found guilty of her murder.
Our thoughts today are with little Elsie and those who knew and loved her. Her untimely death at just 18 months old has had a devastating effect, first and foremost on her family, who remain uppermost in our thoughts.
Matthew Scully Hicks is now off to start a lengthy prison sentence. We've heard throughout this trial how he swore, he shouted at Elsie on a regular basis. And as the prosecution suggested, Elsie was a young girl who should have been loved and cared for, not assaulted and abused.
Following the conviction, the High Court conducted a separate fact-finding process to examine whether Craig had failed to protect Elsie. The court formally cleared him of any such failure, noting that multiple professionals had also accepted Matthew's accounts of previous incidents and that there had been no obvious reason for Craig to suspect what was happening. This ruling closed the legal process for Craig, though the impact of the case would remain with him permanently. In 2018, an extended child practice review was published, examining every professional interaction with Elsie and her adoptive family from the time she entered their care to the day of her death. The findings painted a sobering picture of missed opportunities, procedural gaps, and misplaced confidence. One of the report's central observations was that professionals had consistently viewed Matthew and Craig Scully Hicks through a positive lens. Their presentation as attentive, articulate, and well-organized parents appeared to influence how incidents were interpreted. When injuries occurred, explanations were accepted without significant challenge. This bias was evident in several critical moments. The most notable was the missed femur fracture in November 2015, identified only after Elsie's death during a review of her medical records. The original X-ray had shown the injury, but it went unnoticed at the time. Under safeguarding protocols, the discovery of both a tibia and femur fracture in a non-mobile toddler should have triggered an immediate child protection referral. That did not happen. Similarly, a vertical forehead bruise in December 2015 was never properly documented in safeguarding records. Instead, it was logged as a minor accident in line with Matthew's explanation. Follow-up visits noted the bruise, but did not question its origin in a formal way, despite the unusual pattern of injuries in a child so young. The review concluded that there had been a lack of what it called professional curiosity. This term referred to the need for professionals, from social workers to health visitors to medical staff, to actively consider alternative explanations for repeated injuries, even when those explanations might lead to uncomfortable questions about a caregiver. In a move rarely seen in such cases, a formal apology was issued to Elsie's biological family. The review acknowledged that her death was not solely the result of an individual's actions, but also a failure of the safeguarding system that should have been able to protect her. The recommendations from the review were direct and practical. First, all injuries without a clear and consistent cause must be escalated for multi-agency review, regardless of the caregiver's perceived reliability. Second, independent review of medical imaging should be standard whenever unexplained fractures are found in a young child. This measure would provide a second level of scrutiny to avoid the kind of oversight seen in Elsie's case. Third, and perhaps most crucially, professionals were urged never to allow the image of model parents to override objective evidence. Trust and rapport are important, the report noted, but they should never come at the cost of a child's safety. These lessons, if implemented, would not undo the tragedy of Elsie's death, but they stand as a reminder and a warning that vigilance, persistence, and a willingness to challenge assumptions are essential in protecting the most vulnerable.
I fully accept the findings of the report. The report, as you say, does indicate that social workers had and staff from all agencies saw the adoption as very positive. They perceived the adopted family as a really positive solution for Elsie. And I think the report is clear. It identifies the issue as you have said, that actually that positive lens meant that they weren't looking in the way that they should have been, and so you're right. That's something that they should have done. That's something that we have as an organisation recognised. We've taken that fully on board. We have implemented a number of checks and balances into the system to try and make sure that that lens isn't there. That lens is actually, I suppose, we take a different view. We always look every time we see anything that we consider it to be safeguarded.
When you look back at the pattern of injuries, particularly between the period of November 2015 to March 2016, you can see that had there been one agency or maybe one worker that had all of that information, that potentially there would have been an opportunity to have raised safeguarding concerns. As it was, each individual incident was seen separately, and no safeguarding concerns were raised against any of those injuries.
Elsie's story is more than a record of one family's tragedy. It is a warning about the hidden dangers that can exist even in homes that seem safe from the outside. She was in the care of people trusted to protect her, surrounded by professionals who had multiple chances to see the warning signs. Yet the truth slipped through the cracks, concealed behind reassuring explanations and the image of a stable family. Her case exposes two critical realities: the risk posed by trusted caregivers who abuse that trust, and the systemic blind spots that allow such risks to go undetected. Safeguarding children requires more than ticking boxes. It demands vigilance, training that sharpens professional judgment, and protocols that ensure no injury or concern is dismissed without thorough examination. It is also a call for community awareness. Neighbors, relatives, teachers, and friends all play a role in noticing when something feels wrong and speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable. If you believe more people should hear Elsie's story, please share this video. Every view, comment, and conversation can help keep another child safe. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you never miss a case that needs to be told. Thank you for always tuning in. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.